Emily had always loved the idea of New Year's resolutions. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and focus on a brighter future. This year, her goal was to be more productive and make the most of her time. To symbolize her commitment, she purchased an antique clock from a small, dimly lit shop tucked away in an alley downtown. The clock was beautiful. Its brass frame was intricately carved with strange patterns, and its face bore unusual symbols instead of numbers. The shopkeeper had warned her that the clock was special, but she'd waved off his cryptic words as nothing more than a sales pitch. On New Year's Eve, Emily proudly displayed the clock on her mantelpiece. As her friends arrived for the party, they admired it, though a few remarked on how the symbols on the face seemed to shift slightly when they looked away. Emily laughed it off, attributing it to the champagne. As the night wore on, the energy built toward the countdown. When the clock struck 11:59 p.m., something strange happened. The room fell unnaturally silent. The murmurs of her guests, the music, even the sound of the fireworks outside all vanished. Emily stared at the clock, which now emitted a faint golden glow. The second hand ticked forward in excruciatingly slow motion, each tick reverberating in her chest like a heartbeat. When the clock struck midnight, a deafening chime rang out. Emily clutched her ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside her head. Darkness enveloped her, and she felt as though she were falling into an endless void. When she opened her eyes, Emily found herself back at the start of the party. The clock was on the mantelpiece, its brass frame gleaming, and her friends were just arriving. Confused but relieved, she assumed she'd had too much to drink and dismissed it as a strange dream. The night unfolded exactly as it had before, down to the smallest detail. But as the clock struck midnight again, the same deafening chime rang out, and Emily was plunged back into darkness. When she awoke again, it was New Year's Eve for the third time. At first, Emily tried to play along, thinking she was caught in some bizarre version of déjà vu. But no matter what she did differently, the night always ended with the clock's chime and her return to the beginning. As the cycles repeated, Emily began to notice subtle changes. Her friends' faces seemed off, their smiles were too wide, their laughter too sharp. Their eyes followed her, unblinking, even when she wasn't speaking. By the 10th cycle, Emily realized her friends weren't human anymore. Their movements were jerky, as though they were puppets on invisible strings. They would murmur in low voices, their words garbled and incoherent, but always tinged with malice. And the clock was louder now. Its ticking echoed in her skull, each tick driving her closer to madness. Desperate to break the loop, Emily tried everything, smashing the clock, running out of the house, even refusing to host the party altogether. But nothing worked. No matter what she did, midnight came, and with it, the chime that reset her nightmare. On what she thought might be the 100th loop, Emily confronted the clock directly. "What do you want from me?" she screamed. The symbols on the clock's face began to shift and swirl, forming words she could finally read. "Time is not yours to command." The clock's hands spun wildly, faster and faster, until they were a blur. Emily felt herself being pulled toward it, as though the clock were a vortex. Her vision darkened, and the last thing she heard was the relentless ticking. When she woke up, Emily was no longer in her home. She was in a vast, timeless void, surrounded by countless other people, all staring at glowing clocks of their own. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow. Emily screamed, but no sound came out. Her clock floated in front of her, its hands frozen at 11:59 p.m. Beneath it, the words appeared again, "Welcome to eternity." And as the hands ticked forward one last time, Emily realized she would never see another New Year. It was supposed to be the perfect New Year's Eve. A group of 6 college friends, Sam, Mia, Ethan, Rachel, Liam, and Zoe, rented a remote cabin in the woods to escape the chaos of the city and ring in the new year with laughter, drinks, and memories. The cabin was charmingly rustic, with creaking wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and an old grandfather clock that stood ominously in the corner of the living room. The group spent the evening playing board games, roasting marshmallows, and reminiscing about the highs and lows of the past year. As the clock inched closer to midnight, they huddled together, champagne glasses in hand, ready to count down to the new year. 10, 9, 8. They chanted in unison. But as they reached 3, a faint whisper echoed through the room. 2, 1. The whisper said, perfectly synchronized with their voices. The friends froze, their laughter dying on their lips. Did anyone else hear that? Mia asked, her voice shaky. Probably just the wind, Ethan said dismissively, though his eyes darted to the dark windows. They shrugged it off and clinked their glasses, shouting, Happy New Year. Fireworks boomed faintly in the distance, and the group quickly returned to their celebrations. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Around 1 a.m., Zoe noticed something odd. Guys, look at the grandfather clock, she said, pointing to it. The clock's hands were stuck at 11:59. Maybe it's broken, Liam said, walking over to inspect it. He reached out to touch the clock's face, but as soon as his fingers grazed the glass, the chime struck loud, deep, and echoing, as if the cabin itself were ringing. The friends clutched their ears, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more deafening, until the room seemed to tremble. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Okay, that's enough creepy for one night, Sam said, laughing nervously. But when they looked at the clock again, the hands had moved. It now read 12:01, but it was counting backward. What the hell, Rachel whispered. The clock continued ticking in reverse, and the room grew colder with each tick. The friends tried to ignore it, retreating to their rooms to sleep, but none of them could shake the unease that had settled over the cabin. At 3 a.m., Sam woke up to the sound of faint whispers outside his window. Peeking through the curtains, he saw footprints in the snow, leading away from the cabin and into the forest. They glowed faintly, as if lit by embers. He woke the others. There's someone outside, Sam said, his voice tight with fear. Armed with flashlights and a baseball bat, the group followed the glowing footprints. They led deep into the woods, where the trees seemed unnaturally tall, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy. The footprints ended abruptly in a small clearing, where the air felt heavy and electric. In the center of the clearing stood an old sundial, its shadow pointing directly at the number 12. But the strangest thing was the faint echo of a countdown in the air. 10, 9, 8. It's coming from everywhere, Zoe whispered, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The friends turned to leave, but they found themselves back in the clearing, no matter which direction they went. It was as if the forest itself were keeping them there. As the countdown reached 3, the whispers turned into a chorus of voices. 2, 1. When the countdown ended, the clearing erupted in a blinding flash of light. When the friends opened their eyes, they were back in the cabin, sitting on the couch, champagne glasses in hand. 10, 9, 8. The countdown had restarted. No, Rachel said, standing up. We just did this, we just counted down. The clock struck midnight again, and the whispers began. This time, they were louder. The group was trapped in a time loop, reliving the same New Year's Eve over and over. Each time the loop reset, the whispers grew more insistent, more menacing. And each time, one of them disappeared. By the 5th loop, only Sam and Mia were left. They begged the clock to stop, smashing it with whatever they could find, but it always returned, pristine, ticking backward toward midnight. In the final loop, Sam realized the truth. This isn't just a loop, he said, staring at the glowing footprints outside. We're the countdown. What do you mean? Mia asked, her voice trembling. Each time we disappear, it's because we're the ones being counted down. It's taking us, one by one. As the clock ticked down for the last time, Sam and Mia held hands, their faces pale with fear. The clock struck midnight, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. When the cabin was discovered weeks later, it was empty. The grandfather clock stood in the corner, its hands frozen at 11:59. No one ever found out what happened to the 6 friends. But every New Year's Eve, the cabin lights up, and the faint sound of a countdown can be heard in the woods. 10, 9, 8. It was the New Year's Eve party of the decade. Sophia had spent weeks planning every detail, invites sent to the most elite of her circle, gourmet food catered by the finest chefs, and a stunning masquerade theme to add a touch of mystery. Her mansion was decked out in gold and silver, chandeliers sparkling like stars, and a string quartet playing soft, haunting melodies in the grand ballroom. By 9 p.m., the party was in full swing. The room was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the rustle of elaborate gowns. Everyone wore a mask, each more extravagant than the last, feathers, jewels, and intricate designs that concealed their identities. That was the fun of it. After all, no one knew who anyone else was until the unmasking at midnight. Sophia floated through the crowd like a queen, basking in the compliments on her hosting skills. But then, she noticed something odd. In the corner of the room stood a figure dressed entirely in black, wearing a simple, pale mask with no features, just two hollow eye holes and a small slit for a mouth. Unlike everyone else, this guest didn't join in the chatter or dancing. They stood completely still, watching. Sophia frowned. She didn't remember inviting anyone who fit that description. "Who's that?" she asked her best friend, Clara. Clara turned to look but shrugged. "No idea. Maybe someone's plus one." Sophia didn't like it, but she decided to let it slide. The party was too perfect to let one strange guest ruin her mood. As the night went on, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced at the masked guest, they were standing in a different spot, but always at the edge of the room, always staring. Enjoying the party, she finally asked, approaching them. The masked figure tilted their head slightly but said nothing. "Listen, if you're not on the guest list, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Sophia said, her voice firm. The figure didn't move. Instead, they raised a hand and pointed to the grandfather clock in the corner. The time read 11:59 p.m. Sophia shivered. Something about the way they pointed, so deliberate, so unnervingly calm, made her uneasy. "Fine," she snapped, turning away. "Security will handle you." But when she looked back, the figure was gone. At midnight, the quartet stopped playing, and the room fell into a hushed silence. The unmasking had begun. One by one, the guests removed their masks, revealing laughing faces flushed with champagne and cheer. Sophia stood at the center of the room, waiting for the moment when the mysterious guest would be revealed. "Everyone take off your masks," she called, her voice bright but edged with nervous energy. She scanned the room, but the pale masked figure was nowhere to be seen. Did anyone see where that creepy guest went? She whispered to Clara. Clara frowned. "Who?" "The one in the black outfit and the white mask. They were standing by the clock." Clara shook her head. "Sophia, I didn't see anyone like that all night." Sophia's stomach twisted. That wasn't possible. She'd seen them, spoken to them. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the guests looked around, murmuring nervously. And then, one by one, the chandeliers dimmed until the ballroom was plunged into near darkness. Only the faint glow of the grandfather clock remained, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Sophia's heart pounded as she stepped toward the clock. Its hands were spinning wildly, faster and faster, until they stopped abruptly at 12 o'clock. The pale masked guest stood beneath the clock. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the figure stepped forward. "Who are you?" Sophia demanded, her voice trembling. The guest reached up and removed their mask, but there was no face beneath it. The space where a face should have been was smooth, featureless skin, as if they were a living mannequin. The slit for the mouth moved, though, and a hollow, echoing voice filled the room. "You invited me, Sophia," it said. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't invite you." "Oh, but you did. With every lie, every betrayal, every selfish choice, you called me here. I am the mask you wear, the face you hide behind. And tonight, the mask becomes the wearer." Before Sophia could react, the figure lunged at her. The room erupted in chaos as the lights flickered violently. Guests screamed and scattered, but the doors wouldn't open. Sophia felt a cold, suffocating pressure as the figure's faceless head pressed against hers. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then, everything went black. When the guests finally managed to break out of the mansion hours later, they found Sophia sitting in the center of the ballroom. Her elaborate gown was untouched, her hair perfectly styled, but her face was blank. Smooth skin stretched where her features used to be, and a pale, emotionless mask sat where her head should have been. The guests fled in terror, and the mansion was abandoned. To this day, it's said that on New Year's Eve, you can hear the faint sound of laughter coming from the ballroom. If you dare to enter, you might see her, Sophia, the hostess who became the guest. And if you stay too long, you might find yourself wearing a mask that won't come off.